at the time of the premiere in 1999, this piece was furiously controversial, and not just in the press, where it was sometimes acclaimed as the great American opera and sometimes dismissed as the latest horror inflicted on the listening public. Part of the answer to that lies, as you said, in the fact that everybody has a personal relationship or individual response to the material. And if what you were presenting is not what they were looking for, they didn't like it. But what were the other causes of the controversy, do you think?
Well, I alluded to some of that is and this is not just critics and writers, but just individual viewers, their personal acquisition of Great Gatsby and what was important to them. For 10 years, I was trying to not think about this piece, and I couldn't avoid it. Strangers would come up to me with problems that they had with that opera. One guy came up to me on a bus and said, the biggest problem was the third scene of the first act. He says, when you brought Wolfsheim out on stage and had that little conversation with Gatsby, that destroyed all my illusions about Gatsby. It was horrible to see him just a common underworld gangster. Get rid of that scene and your opera will be 50% better. And I said, well, I'm really glad you remember that situation, but that does happen. That's actually in the novel, and I think it's important that he be an underworld character. But for this viewer or listener, this was a deal breaker. Many things that I discovered were deal breakers about just the treatment of the subject. Some people thought it was just wildly dissonant, kind of rebarbative surface of the piece. Some people thought it was far too mellifluous and wasn't abstract enough and so forth. I mean, but the world of opera is filled with active listeners, which I appreciate, but very retentive listeners. One person who came to the second Met iteration, she said, I came back, she met me right outside the thing. She said, you're that composer. She said, I came back to hear your piece again, but I just hated it. I had to come back and find out why I hated it so much. I said, well, what was it you remembered? Well, I was bothered by that last scene. I kept seeing it over and over again. These people carrying this casket and the rain was coming down. There's this kind of strange music going on. I hated it. I just hated it. And I said, well, I appreciate your coming back. She says, yes, and I paid $100 for my ticket. I said, well, that's amazing. And I said, well, what do you think about it this time? She says, well, I still hate it. He says, it just bothers me. It's very disturbing. It's like it gave me kind of nightmares, and I kept seeing that scene over and over. I'll probably keep seeing it. I said, well, on balance, from my perspective, that's not so bad. I really felt sad but I said, it's not so bad because I think all we try to do when we make something is have something stick, and that's certainly the way I wrote that scene. That's kind of what I hoped was going to happen. And it's a scene that, of course, caused infinite amounts of friction.
In Chicago.
Oh, particularly in Chicago.
The tradition is that the opera ends when the hero dies.
That's right. And they ran, in Chicago, they said, we want to run the scene in piano dress 3 times. Once, it's not going to happen at all. We're leaving it out. Once, we're going to run it as you wrote it. And once, we're going to run it with our cuts, our recommended cuts, which is about half the scene. And we're going to have everybody, all the dramaturgs and so forth, assembled and watched all these versions. And then, the amazing thing happened. I said, well, how are you going to deal with this? He says, well, we're going to vote. And the whole cast and crew and, I guess, staff, and everyone voted, which made me really nervous. But eventually, they decided that they kept the scene. The scene for me is, I knew it was not a very orthodox opera scene, and I knew, I'd read about Dr. Faustus, this Busoni opera, which I think is a wonderful opera. And the reason we don't ever want to be at that opera is the hero dies, and they go on, you know, and they talk about him and try to figure him out and so forth. This is really, we don't want to see this. And so I knew I had something of a hot potato in the opera world here. But it seemed to be the most polarizing thing. Some people felt like it was the scene they retained the most of, and others thought that it just should never be there. Had a guy, actually a couple, sitting in front of us one time at the Met, and after every scene of the second act, they put on their coats and got into a kind of crouching position. But then something happened either in the interlude or the beginning of the next scene that sort of arrested them. And they were doing this and everything. Finally, the last interlude is very short, and they had their coats on, and they were kind of somewhat elevated and almost a little bit down there. The scene started, and there was actually a rather amazing stage picture with the rain and the costuming of really striking of Jordan and this black, strange black, tight-fitting kind of suit. And I'd have to say, at that point, something shifted. It's this thing about, you know, your rare opportunity to actually observe what people are, how people are reacting. And they were totally concentrated in the last scene. And they actually then stayed and applauded the production, which absolutely amazed me. I thought that with all the, you know, assembling of every coat, and at one point they put their hats on, that they would be out of there as fast as they could get out. But it's this sort of amazing, almost dialogue experience of people in the theater.
But without the last scene of Gatsby, you have an opera without a meaning.
And you have also threads of really amazingly interesting threads. One of the librettists I talked to said, well, we do all that right at the beginning, and the whole thing is flashbacks, and everybody knows all the outcomes. And instead, it's a very supple theater piece, and everything will be staged from the standpoint of a party. And we'll keep moving out of it, and we'll eventually establish that what we saw at the beginning is where we were headed, and it was kind of like a wonderful Greek unity. To me, the tying up was where we wanted to get, rather than where we wanted to start. I do think that the theater's reactivity, the way that the audience is volatile, is one of the reasons that the medium is now probably the healthiest in all of concert music.